Hello, Facebook. Holy crappers. Hey, I love the halo. This is crazy. What's up, peeps? Dude, I am outside and it is amazing. Trying to get some melatonin up in here. So, yeah, it's really good, by the way. I'm going to be probably talking about some biohacking in the near future. And so just wanted to get on here while I'm getting melatonin and talk about something that, hey, Jorge, how you doing? How's it going? I want to talk about something very quickly while I'm getting all this melatonin and sun in. It's something that I myself do, but I'm also part of one of my hustling jobs is, hey there. Hey, Dimitri. How you doing? And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the neuropsychology behind what drives our social and cultural drive towards like and authority and community and identity, and the ways in which we derive pleasure, but also the ways, hey Donna, the ways in which we derive identity, not just pleasure, from even things like just pressing like on someone's Facebook status or pressing share, and how even the kind of neuroscience behind that literally is all about, okay, Jorge, thanks for stopping by. Thank you very much. And so what I want to talk about really, really quickly is just how this operates on a neuroscientific level, in that every time we press share, dopamine shoots through our veins, right? And we get serotonin and norepinephrine and all of these similar experiences that many people get. Hey, Chuck. That when even, let's say, somebody who is playing sports, a runner or something like that, and you call it the runner's high, that's because you are literally being influxed with a series, hey Carlos, and you are literally flooding your body with a huge amount of different chemicals that literally that you can get from using drugs, cocaine and so on and so forth. And so you actually don't need those drugs, by the way. And this is not a stay in school, don't take drugs kind of talk here. It's more about how our body already has within it these drugs, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, right? And so when we press like, when we press share, hey Alan, this is essentially what's happening with our body, but also there's a social element, there's a social dynamic. And there's a great book by Jonah Berger. Hey, Lisa, by Jonah Berger, who he specializes in neuromarketing. And, you know, he talks about how, why is it that people like, why is it that people press share? And it's very, very interesting because he specializes, like I said, in neuromarketing. So the neuroscience behind marketing. Hey, Chris. And, the neuroscience of marketing. And so what he says in this book is, he says, you know, the reason why we press like, the reason why we press share is because we connect, right? So essentially you have the sociological dimension where we're simply pressing like and share because we want to feel connected. But then there's another element where we kind of get this high off of saying, hey, look, I shared that. Hey, look, because it's from Al Jazeera, or because, hey, look, it's from CNN. Hey, look, because it's from Fox News. I am now using their social authority, right? And the reason why I even call it social authority is because we, all of us, have agreed upon that news agencies and news organizations have some sort of authority that we do not have, and access to information that we don't have. Journalists have access to information that we do not have. And so, hey Mylan, hey Leonardo. And so what we do is we rely upon this idea that, you know, there is this authority or this agency or this organization like Fox News or CNN or whatever your flavor has this particular amount of authority. So every time I share it, I'm not just sharing it from my account. I'm sharing it because it's actually connected with their authority. And this is exactly what happens even on a much more minuscule level. So let's say you're going and you end up going and you end up buying a drink, let's say at Starbucks, right? And you're going to your friends, hey man, I just went to a Starbucks, and blah, 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 blah. So it becomes one of these things where it's all about name dropping. Hey, Michael, right? Yes, thank you, Carlos. Yes, in fact, I actually worked for a CBD company, and so learned a lot about the endocannabinoid system, right? And so, yes, you were totally right. Our body is a mechanism for drugs, right? And so, no, you're totally cool. This is exactly why I do this, is to encourage conversation. And so, my whole thing about jumping on here is, and I mean, this is something that I had struggled with for a long time, if I'm honest, is the social aspect of Facebook and Twitter and so on and so forth. Yes, that's my job. Yes, that's what I do. Or one of the many hustle jobs, other than lecturing and all of this kind of stuff, is doing social media. And so, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that it's come to the point where you don't even have to think about it, where it becomes habitual. I'm going to like this. I'm going to share this. I'm just going to press this button, right? We have power sharers, power likers, right? Power emoji users. Now, interestingly enough, and I want to talk about this really, really quickly, is this idea of using emojis, but also letting the emojis feel for you. No longer do we have to feel, right? We have the LOL, we have the LMAO. Nobody really actually laughs their ass off, if we're going to take that actually to the point of literality, right? But we use these phrases, and sometimes when we use the LOL, we're not even laughing. Sometimes it's literally because we want to be shown to be interacting. We want the human connection, right? And maybe this is too idealistic. You can even take it to more of a nihilistic sense of interpretation and say, well, people are doing it because they know they're going to die, and they're just doing it to create this false sense of meaning, right? So interaction becomes this kind of a death avoidance act, right? And so depending on your particular worldview of why people do what they do. But what I want to talk about is that, we need to actually do less of that. We need to be more aware of what we're doing. We need less people on Facebook. We need more people interacting in the world, and to be honest with you, initially what kind of even brought me to this conversation and to this thought, right, is what's going on in the world at the moment, and not even the world, really within the United States, with the whole kind of conversation between Trump and Kanye and Snoop Dogg, like just completely ripping them to shreds and stuff, and how we are so addicted not to novelty. We're addicted to the status quo. And I mean that emotional status quo. And what I mean to imply here is that we get so inundated with so much negative information that becomes the status quo. That becomes sharing that, liking that, pushing that across our own social media feeds, pushing that into our everyday lives. I mean, there's this kind of almost avoidance of looking at the world from a positive view. In fact, you're almost castigated and ostracized if you start saying that the world is actually in a better place than it was 3,000 years ago, right? And so, yeah, there are definitely similarities, Carlos, to Facebook and Survivor. Because you're kind of on this virtual island, and but the problem is, and this is where I wanted to deal with. It's not even the actual sociological aspects, but more cultural event aspect, but more sociological. In that, we like and we share mainly because yes, we want to connect, but then we also look. Not because we're actually liking and we don't use emojis because we're actually feeling what those emojis are actually explaining. What we're doing is yes, exactly. We would like Marley, more of Marley, maybe even Bob Marley. More Rasta and less pasta. But anyhow, I just wanted to get on here and kind of encourage us to be a little bit more thoughtful about not only what we're sharing, but just how we participate in life and how we participate in forums like Facebook. Because I think the problem is that we confuse something like Facebook for reality. And the problem is that it's not. It'd be a bit odd if you went up to somebody and tried to poke them, or if you went up, actually probably end up in prison. Or if you went and, every time somebody said something that you liked, you said share, you shouted out share, or the same thing with the idea of like, or after every time somebody said something or talked about a current event or had an opinion about something and you just shouted like, a lot of people would probably think you have Tourette's. And so the the reality is that, you know, Facebook is not even necessarily a microcosm of the real world, because it's in one sense it redefines the way in which we even understand what it means to be in the real world. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, yeah, more pasta, man. That was the worst, by the way. I can actually do a way better accent, but I'm not gonna do it right now. But anyhow, so I just wanted to get on, because I think we're living in this state of almost kind of the deer in the headlight kind of modality, right? Of where we're experiencing a lot of what we call reality through the virtual, right? Meaning we're experiencing a lot of what's going around in the world through Facebook. We're experiencing a lot of what we deem reality, what we understand reality to be, or what we think it should be, through things like Facebook, where, you know, posts are being shared and videos are being shared and content's being shared and Facebook Lives are being shared and so on and so forth. And so, you know, in reality, we have to be a lot more aware of what's going on, you know, and And I am going to probably push my agenda here, I guess. And it's that, you know, yes, is the United States, you know, not in the best place right now? Probably. But in the scheme of world history, and there's a great website, and I'm going to share the link once I find it below, or just DM me if you want it. But it literally goes through every area, you know, of development, of technology, and this is across the world over. And it says, you know, we are in a much better place as a species than we were 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. You know, and the problem is that we get inundated, and this is kind of going back to what I started this conversation on, is we get inundated with controversy. We get inundated. You know, we love soap operas. We love drama. Now, part of that, by the way, the neuroscience behind that is our brains are constantly looking out for ways to protect us. Our brain does not look at the world and think, what a beautiful place, right? We have to train our brains to rethink that way. And that's an evolutionary hangover, right? That's kind of an issue that has followed us for thousands upon thousands of years. When you live in caves and you're trying to escape mammoth-sized animals, you know, and every decision could be life or death, we still operate on that way. And the reality is that our kind of neurospace, you know, the neuroscientific experience of our brain and what's going on is still kind of reliant upon that evolutionary interpretation of reality, meaning we are constantly looking for danger. So even when, and everybody does this, by the way, everybody does this. Have you ever had like a good day, or have you ever had like a good week, or whatever it is, or a good conversation, right? And then at the end of it, you're like, crap, something bad's going to happen, or crap, when's this going to end? I'm waiting for the shit to hit the fan, right? And so why do we do that? So one, you could say, yeah, we're pessimists, yada, 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 blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, it's actually evolutionary. And there's a lot of great neuroscience on the kind of evolution of the brain and our understanding of it. But essentially what's even going on is that's what's happening within Facebook. So we click because we want to feel part of that tribe. We argue because we feel like we want to differentiate ourselves from that tribe because they might be a danger to us, right? And so we have this extreme tribal mentality that's going on. Yes, survival, that is happening constantly every day, right? And so we participate in this tribalism by allowing our brain to control how we should think. So when we press like, boom, and this is actually, there's a lot of tests on this, by the way, since the emergence of Facebook, is that as soon as you hit like, boom, you get dopamine shot through your veins. You get dopamine shot up to your brain, right? And you get rewarded. Now, here's the thing, and I don't know if you knew this, interestingly enough, that dopamine rewards you whether it's a good experience or a bad experience. However, if it's a good experience, you usually get dopamine with serotonin, oxytocin, all of those great things, right? However, dopamine gets shot into your veins even if it's bad news, even if you experience something bad, even treacherous, dangerous, you're still getting dopamine, except it comes with cortisol, right? And all these inflammatory chemicals that are shot through your body that cause brain fog, that even cause, and I talked about this before, and I'm not going to talk about this right now, but I talked about the neuroscience of sexual assault about a week ago. And the same exact thing, is happening, probably not on such an extreme level. Yes, yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, Lisa, by the way. I'm not trying to castigate or trying to ostracize that behavior. I'm more just trying to explain it. I think it's okay if we try to do that, but as long as we are the ones who are clicking because we want to, not because we feel compelled to, or not because it's become some sort of unthinking habit, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I mean, see, we live in a place, like you just said, Carlos, where, in a world, and when I say world, I'm talking about Facebook, in a virtual space where we now think it's okay to hate other people because they believe differently than us. Hey, Michael, right? And so, we think it's okay to somehow disavow family members or disavow friends that we've known for 20 or 30 years. Now, maybe that's something you need to do. Maybe that's something that you've needed to do even prior to knowing their political stance, right? Yes, cognitive dissonance, exactly. Hey, Michael. And so the reality is that we've literally created an environment where we needed to make decisions maybe 20 years ago about a relationship with somebody, but now we use this moment to justify our inability to make that decision then, right? And so we almost become powerless, and that's why I talked about earlier about, like, we have this kind of deer in headlights mentality when we're sharing content, when we're liking content, meaning we are so locked in. And this is exactly what happens, by the way, when you go through moments where your body is just coursing through with cortisol and you are trying to defend yourself, meaning, like, even in the midst of arguments on Facebook, your body is reacting as if you were being chased down by a mammoth tiger. Now, for those of you who think that's unrealistic, please go do the research. There's Google. There's so much on the neuroscience of Facebook, and what it does to our body. And it's not just Facebook. It's just social media in general. It creates and makes us more reactionary and less capable of thinking through what we're feeling, right? And I think we need to be a bit more responsible with how we play that out, right? Oh, hang on. I'm trying to, for some reason, I can get most of your comment, but for some reason it's, I have to, I think, like your comment. There you go. Ironically, I had to like your comment to see the whole thing. And people hate that sort of freedom. Yeah. And I mean, interestingly enough, that you bring up the idea of being yourself and individuality. And that's where I think Facebook gives us the most, hey, Connie, where ironically, and I'm not disagreeing with you here, Carlos, so please hear what I'm saying, right, is that, where ironically everybody comes on and they think, okay, I'm going to share my picture, I'm going to share my pictures, I'm going to share my favorite quote on my about section of my Facebook, and they think that they are being individual. But think about it, everybody's doing that. They're just sharing different information, but there's a template. And so we are all fitted into this template, right? And we have to basically adjust to how things work for us. So like I said earlier, one of my hustle jobs is doing social media. And so one of the things that I'm always on the cusp of is learning when, for example, Facebook is changing algorithms. And so, one of their big ones was this last January, and you may have already noticed this, is that, they've, and don't worry, this is going to come back to where everything that we've been talking about, is that, they changed it so then basically all of the content will be solely focused on family and friends that you interact with, right? So there we go. So here we are given the illusion of individuality on a platform like Facebook. And yet our individuality is always being shaped and formed and controlled and defined, right? And so there's that sociological aspect of, we think, okay, when I'm liking this statement, I'm liking it as George. When I like it, as Lisa. When I like it, I'm liking it as Carlos. And yet we're still all filtered through this template, right? This virtual template where all of who we are is being, and I don't even want to get on like what how much information is out there on us. But and I don't mean to make that sound conspiracy theorist and so on, but yeah, yeah, thanks, Carlos. I think in terms of how we are operating on here, there is no separation, right? We think that there's a separation between the I that interacts on Facebook and the I that interacts in the world, and we're actually connected. And so here's the thing. Things like Facebook, we think of easily as technology, right? Okay, that's technology because it has some sort of computer-based component and so on. And that's how we have generated our understanding of what it means and how to define technology in the last 50, 100 years. However, technology has been always with us, and we should never fear this. And so this will go back to what I was just saying about your identity, Carlos, is this idea of technology has always been with us. So you have famous human myths, right? Now, this is not meant to offend people when I use the word myth, because myth for me doesn't necessarily mean lie. It doesn't mean untruth. It doesn't even mean that it necessarily didn't happen. It means that there's a deeper truth to it. And so you have this myth story of the Tower of Babel, right? That Christianity and Judaism co-opted. And the reason why I say co-opted is because that story was flying around way before the entrance of structured religion and so on and so forth. And so the whole narrative is about, hey, our neighbor, they got bricks, and that was the new technology for them, right? And so you have this narrative, right, of this ziggurat being built, this Tower of Babel, and you're like, crap, they've got technology, right? And they're going to use it against me, and they're going to use it against us. And at the end of the day, it might literally separate us all, right? And so, you have this kind of narrative in the back of our minds that we should always fear technology. We should always be afraid of technology. Now, I'm a big techno-spiritualist, meaning like I believe that the new kind of spiritual revolution is going to come through technology, right? And so, I think we're redefining what it means human. If we get to the point where I've been in conversations with people who've actually been tinkering with this new technology of uploading your human consciousness to a new robot body and all this kind of stuff, and it's just very interesting conversation. I don't have any answers. I don't have any, this is my forecast. Just interesting conversations with billionaires who spend way too much money trying to create eternal life. But anyhow, back to all of this and individuality and kind of almost reverse engineering this conversation is trying to understand that what it is about Facebook and what it is about our identity is all tied in with how we're interacting with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and these kind of micro worlds. And I don't even want to say microcosms because, let's be honest, not everybody who is on Facebook is who they are in real life. Ironically, for many people, Facebook and platforms like this give them a lot more bravery than they would have in real life. And, and that goes back to this idea of individuality, right? Yes, no, I know, exactly. And I've seen some crazy AI stuff. And so, yeah, no, I know. And to me, I'm very intrigued by it. I love it. I got about, hey, Mike, how you doing? And so, this idea, this illusion of individuality is templated through platforms like Facebook. So we get the idea of like, I can go on, I can share my opinion, I can rant, and I can get pissed off and kind of almost kind of push along this negativity that's being shared and so on and so forth. Oh, thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Yeah, by the way, I do hope to do more of these talks. I'm just working with 3 different audiences, okay? 3 different audiences between here and UK and Australia. So I'm trying to work out times to do a weekly chat. Hey, Alfred. And this notion of the neoliberal fantasy of individuality, and I don't want to use big jargon because I know that there's a varied audience on here, but this kind of illusion of the individual self, and I think that's a major issue when you have platforms like Facebook that feed off of that rely on us to buy into the fact that it is all about us and about nothing else. And for those of you who've known me for a long time, I've spent a lot of time in foreign context. Hey, Alfred, and living in the East for about 20 years off and on, places like, Pakistan and Palestine and, India and so on and so forth. And it's very interesting to live in these cultures and to see a major differentiation between how important the individual is here versus how important the individual is there. And it's not that you are not an individual, it's that you are always chased by a bigger purpose. And that bigger purpose is found in the person standing next to you, the stranger that you don't know, the mother who's raised you, right? And so you find that bigger purpose, and this is kind of what you alluded to, Lisa, earlier, was this idea of I like because I'm trying to connect with my fellow man. And so we use these romanticized words like, and the reason why I say romanticized is because you will have groups, tribes who defend these ideas from a romantic perspective. And so we use words like communism and, Marxism and so on and so forth. And we use them because they've been popularized, not even because many even know what they mean or what they entail. And many rely on the historical narrative to even define what they could be. And that's a major issue today because it means we're uninformed, right? Yes. Oh man, that's a great movie, by the way. Thank you for bringing that up, Carlos. If you ever get a chance, watch They Live. With the wrestler Roddy Piper. Also watch the interpretation of They Live from Slavoj Žižek, a friend of mine. And so Žižek, Zizek, by the way, check that out. They Live, and really, really good stuff. Forgive his lisp; he's got a crazy lisp. Yeah, so my whole thing, again, about jumping on here is that all of this stuff is connected. Like we are, we aren't individuals who are participating in a virtual community. We find our individuality through the virtual community, right? But it isn't individuality in the sense of just being individual. It's given to you. It's defined for you. It's templated through these particular filters, meaning you can't just go on and just put everything, right? There are standards. There are community standards that will kick you off, and there are certain behaviors that will completely get you banned from using the platform, and so on and so forth. And so that's what I think is ironic when we think we jump on these platforms and we find freedom or we find voice and so on. And I'm not negating all these things. These are actually important for our development, but they can't be the purpose. They can't be the drive. They can't be what pushes us into our real life, right? And so, let me see. I'm sorry. I'm just reading what you're saying here, Carlos. Okay. So, all right. I mean, I don't mind talking about Jesus. Let's see. I don't see him as perfect. I don't see him as the template. I see that he was showing us what we could be. I think if you had talked to me about 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I might have said yes. But I think this is the major issue with institutionalized religion, is that when you institutionalize belief, you institutionalize it in such a way where the only checks and balances for that belief is just that you believe in it. Like there is no checks and balances, meaning you can't go around challenging it. You can't go around pushing the envelope to the point of saying, well, Jesus wasn't God, or Buddha wasn't meant to be worshipped, or Muhammad wasn't perfect, or Muhammad struggled with misogyny, and all of these inflammatory things, because you're constantly going back to either some sort of singular source material like a Bible or the Quran or whatever it is, and you're not allowed to push it. Now, obviously, that's not the case now. We obviously live in a different context where it's okay to have these conversations, right? It's okay to push these boundaries. But I think that was the point. I think when people read things like the Bible and they take it as this kind of closed book where you can't have conversations about it, I think that's dangerous. I think that's where cults come from. I think essentially that's what Christianity is, just on a larger scale. And I know that sounds inflammatory, but what I mean is not every aspect of Christianity, not every person who's a Christian, but there are certain aspects of it. Hey, Warren, right? And so again, I didn't mean to even get on religion. But, let's use that in the context of this whole Facebook understanding and the way in which we're grappling with identity on Facebook and how there's this kind of neuropsychological reaction to pressing like, and neuropsychological reaction and neurochemicals that are surging through our veins, and, where we have these similar religious experiences when we're pressing like, right? So if you go into a church setting or, temple, wherever you might believe, right, then you literally, and they've actually done tests, this is really interesting, right? The neuropsychology of religious experience is no different than pressing like or pressing share on Facebook. Now, of course, I know that for some of you, that's going to be a brain dump, because you go like, well, how is that? Well, again, one, Google the neuroscience of social media. Two, Google the neuroscience of religion. And the same chemicals that get shot in your veins, like things like oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, right, adrenaline, all of these different things, right, that you end up having almost, for some people, not everybody, and this may not be you, but for many people, you almost even can, sorry, that's a plane, is you end up having this almost kind of out-of-body experience. And again, I'm not saying out-of-body in the traditional sense of the idea of like this spiritual experience, but you're having the same chemical compound shooting through your body that you experience when you go through a religious experience. So in one sense, it's no different. People go to church to experience all of these surge of chemicals. Some people, their church is Facebook. Some people, their church is individuality. Some people, their church is their identity. Their church is, their personal practices, right? Hey, Sarah. Ooh, great question. Spiritual maturity, that's not gained from a like or share. Yeah, so I'm not saying that. In fact, this is Sarah, thank you for that question. I'm definitely not saying that. What I am saying is that that you have a similar spiritual experience with the same idea when you're just talking, by the way, Sarah, strictly just about the neuroscientific reactions of our body, right? And so I'm not saying that you can get spiritual enlightenment by doing that. In fact, I was actually talking about it in the negative, so that when you're doing this, that when you are pressing buttons, you're having similar neurochemical, the kind of mental neurostorm reaction that you would as if you were going to church, and if you were having these moments when you're worshiping and singing all these songs and you're having these spiritual experiences. The same chemicals that are surging through your body in that moment are actually surging through your body in even liking and sharing, right? Especially when you get to the point of the habits without thinking. Meaning like when you just press and like and share and so on and so forth. And again, I've been at fault for that. And so, and what I'm trying to imply here is that when you're doing that, you are invoking this sort of spiritual experience, not spiritual maturity, but spiritual experience in the similar vein, right? Now, again, if you have always grown up with the idea that you're somehow experiencing a being outside of yourself, then you're gonna have a problem with what I've just said, right? No. And I wouldn't say you're changing consciousness either, but I also wouldn't say you're changing consciousness in a church setting either. Like, so, I mean, I wouldn't say that you were somehow altering your consciousness. And again, I'm actually saying that as a critique and not as a positive. So when I was saying all that, I wasn't saying it as this is good. I'm saying that actually this experience isn't good, because what happens is over time your body gets used to, and this is where I was heading with it. So thank you for actually asking that question, Sarah, is that, what you end up doing is you end up getting to the point where your body relies on those chemicals, right? And so your body literally becomes habitual. Like you basically become a drug user, except the drug is now virtual. The drug is now pushing buttons. The drug is now sharing. The drug is now, right? You know, yeah, exactly. So, you know, and this is, I think, a major problem. You know, it's really, really interesting because, for example, so Facebook did this heat map, right? So a heat map is a biometric. It's a behavior. And so this is what I do. So, you know, they did a heat map on where people spend most of their time on Facebook. And so they did, you know, the typical, you know, status share up here, and on your right, you got the ads and stuff. And of course, about 95% of users on that particular biometric reading of this heat map is that people spend obviously most of their time thinking, well, and of course there's a little bit of assumption here, on the what to share, right? And so that's really interesting. People will take more time about what to share, but when they press the share button, meaning someone else's content other than their own, or the like button, they're not. So there's this massive disconnect, and I think part of that disconnect is that, the massive disconnect is that people aren't thinking, and so I actually talked about a little bit about this earlier, Warren, so thank you for that question. But, I'm not a pessimist when it comes to this, but at the same time, I do see that there are narcissistic practices that have been going on, right? And so, yes, can you just paint it blindly and say everybody just wants relationship? Sure, but I don't think that understands or tries to approach it from a nuanced understanding of how we relate to virtual platforms, where relationships are in and of themselves, they're not, I can't touch that person, right? Unless they're your mother that you're Facebooking, right? And sometimes not even then. And so, you have this element where I don't think you can actually look at these behaviors just through pessimism or just through optimism. I think, and I'm not even sure there's a middle ground necessarily. I'm not really big on balance and finding middle grounds. But I think at the same time, I think we have to understand that there is a neuropsychological, and that's why I titled it the way I did. There's a neuropsychological component to this that is much beyond the sociological component, meaning that we are always driven by our brain more than we are by social practices. Now, some of you may disagree with that, but if you think about it, we always had our brain since birth. We haven't always had social practices. Those have been conditioned, those can be unconditioned, those can be lost, those can be learned, unlearned, and unpracticed and practiced. Hey, Pete. And so, sorry, I keep moving around, but, and so when we're dealing with this idea of the kind of neuropsychology behind, what draws us to these practices, is there is a level of addiction. There is a level of susceptibility to addiction. And I'm talking about addiction not to drugs, but to the drugs in our body. And we do it without thinking. And that's my whole point, is that we do it to the point of habit. Like we are not participating in our lives, right? We literally use LOL, even when we're not laughing. We use emojis when we may not even be angry. We use emojis to actually literally feel for us and feel on our behalf. We no longer need to feel. In one sense, things like Facebook and so on and so forth, they almost create us into automatons where we no longer need to live our lives. We simply just update them. And no one knows whether the update is true or real, or if it's actually happened, or if it'll happen in real time, and so on and so forth. And so we rely on these fictions and these fictional behaviors and these fictional approaches to feeling and these fictional approaches to liking and sharing and trying to create community. But in the end, we're literally setting up our own mythology and our own self-narratives. And Carlos, you were talking about this earlier, and our own identities that may have nothing to do with our identity in the real world. And so we have to understand that when we're participating in these communities, you know, and this isn't a call to be true to yourself and all this kind of stuff. I don't know if a self exists, and I don't mean that in some sort of weird new agey sense. What I'm talking about is that, you know, we are constantly being constructed. We are constantly moving along. We are constantly being shaped by our experiences. We are constantly being shaped by our beliefs. And when we lose those beliefs and we gain new ones, then that alters who we are. You know, neuroscience says that, you know, if you access a memory more than once, that memory's changed every single time, that you could never ever access a memory. And this is why I think the idea and the notion of history is a little bit of a misnomer, because you can't access those events. One, most of us weren't around, right, when what we now deem history to be history. And so when we're dealing with identity and we're like, oh, when I was 6 or when I was 5 or when I was 4, right, every time you access that memory, whatever happened then didn't exactly happen the way that you just remembered it. And, you know, nobody likes to hear that, because then it makes us feel like we're out of control. And again, back to the individual self as free and freedom. And you know, we've gotten into the habit of believing that we're constantly in control of our memories and so on and so forth. We don't like to deal with things like losing our memory and so on and so forth. And so, you know, when we're dealing with identity and when we're dealing with accessing memory and we're dealing with virtual platforms that are trying to impose their rules of law and how you should be and what are the community rules and how should you interact, that's not freedom, right? That's literally a templated version of yourself, a predefined version of yourself. And so you know, we need to be aware of that when we're participating in these communities. And that to me isn't necessarily negative. That's just the nature of what we're participating in. Can we change that? Sure, of course we can. That's where I am an optimist. I think we can constantly change things and alter things. And that's why I even do these talks, is because I want the conversations to lead to some sort of measurable change, right? Yes, and see, that's exactly one of the points that I wanted to get on and talk about, is this idea, and I'm very big on social constructionism, meaning, you know, a lot of what we see and interact with isn't true of reality. It's just simply what we've all agreed upon. It's simply what has been passed down as historical, and we even use the word historical to mean true and be unchanging, and really historical now has become really just a code word for status quo, right? And you know, at the end of the day, if it is all about social constructs, you know, then we have to understand our place in that construct. We have to understand what our behaviors mean within the context of that construct. Meaning, a like isn't just a like. A like is about how that like makes you look. A like is about how that makes you feel inside and the neurochemical storms that you're experiencing during the moment that you like it, and then also over time how that will become habitual, and you won't even need to think about liking or sharing without thinking about it, because your body is now reacting for you on your behalf. And so it's almost as if you're possessed, right? And so essentially, if you can think of it that way, you know, over participating in Facebook and all of these different platforms is kind of a possessive moment in our lives. And again, it's not necessarily a negative thing. I'm not necessarily trying to just deconstruct everything. I'm saying be aware of it. You know, be aware of it. Participate. You know, much more intentionally. You know, be a part of it. Take a break from it. You know, especially with all the shit that's being shared on, you know, social media. Half of it's true, half of it's not true, half of it's interpretation, half of it's not interpretation. You know, go out and alter. And this is, again, I think I said this at the beginning. The reason why I even jumped on was because I was seeing all the negativity that was being shared. And it's so bad, especially within the left, right? The kind of leftist world, like you're almost attacked if you start saying, oh, the world's good, or we're in a good place historically speaking, or, you know, as a species, we're much better off than we were, right? And so, you know, the problem is that, just because you might have a positive perspective doesn't mean that you don't take everything else into consideration. And I'm quite an optimist. And I love life and people, and, I enjoy the journey and love words like adventure. And so, but some of that is operating from the fact that we're not thinking about how we're participating in these communities. We're letting the events, we're letting the moments, we're letting the news, we're letting other people's words and so on and so forth think for us, right? And literally emote for us, like to the point where we use emojis where we don't even have to feel anymore. Where we simply react without reacting, and we believe without believing, right? And so we participate in a life that is no longer ours because it's controlled by the words and pictures and images and videos of other people and other organizations. And so, I just wanted to jump on and try to encourage people to be like, you know what? Yes, be positive. If you're a positive person, be positive. Don't feel guilty about that, but try to bring that positivity back into the conversation. Is there negative shit going on in the world every day? Yeah. But how do you change it? By basically changing and altering the narrative. So, altering the moments that are seen as negative by changing the way people think about things, by offering different perspectives that might actually increase the positivity in the world. And so, guys, thank you so much, by the way, for everybody who's jumped on and for everybody who's shared their thoughts, and to leave with maybe Sarah's question here, is to use our creative faculties as a species to be able to build better worlds, to build better conversations, to build better moments for compassion, to build better moments for equality, and are those all idealist ideas? Sure, but why does it have to be a bad thing? So guys, thank you so much for jumping on. Please share this with your families and friends. And again, like I said earlier, I'm planning to be on a little bit more frequently as soon as I get this whole 3-country time difference thing figured out. So guys, much love. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you so much for participating. This is exactly what this is all about. All right, guys. Peace.